Hello all. Alright, so I'm trying something a little bit different this time. What I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start doing a few videos that I record beforehand, and then I'm going to upload them to YouTube, and then I'm going to upload them from YouTube to my Facebook as a way of kind of like hitting all points rather than trying to go to different points, try and connect the dots. Well, in the United States, it's Buddha's birthday today, and unfortunately today happens to be the day that Bernie Sanders dropped out of the presidential race, essentially, or he suspended his campaign, which is a sort of basically giving up. And while I'm sure he has his own personal and very, somewhat defensible reasons for doing so, this is not great or happy news, and I think this would not make Buddha smile. However, it's Siddartha Gautama's birthday today, and he's the one who created Buddhism, so we're gonna do stuff to honor Siddartha Gautama while there's still time, and at least over there. I already did my stuff over here in China, so here we go. This is the prayer book I have today, or mantra book, or whatever. It's like the list of mantras and stuff to recite from, and I figured there's one that's really good because I want to go through. It's a pretty large book, all right? I wanted to go through the ones I thought were grounded, but before I do that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Gautama Buddha, or Siddartha Gautama. Shakyamuni Buddha is what they call him because he's from the Shakya clan. More or less, this was a man who was born into royalty, according to what we have on historical record. He was a man who grew up in great privilege from royalty. He was a prince, and he grew up a part of a pretty hedonistic lifestyle, basically. His family, supposedly, there's a story where he supposedly was told that his parents were told by a fortune teller or something along these lines that he would grow up to be some kind of important spiritual leader if he ever left the outside world, but if he stayed home, he would be like the super king or like super great ruler, and that's what the family wanted him to be. They wanted him to be a good king and not just start a spiritual revolution of sorts. And you can guess how that worked over for him, because we have Buddhism and not another dynasty in the past to look back on. Though his kingdom doesn't seem like it fell apart or anything. But with that in mind, I've already wasted 3 minutes. Yeah, so he started off living a fairly hedonistic life because his family sheltered him and tried to keep him sheltered from anything negative that might influence his world perspective. But one day they messed up, and it was for the benefit of humanity that happened, because he ended up going outside the palace walls, and he got to see different sites that would influence his perspectives and expand his worldview. And while he was outside the palace walls, he saw for the first time a sick person, a dying person, and sickness, suffering, and somebody was sick, somebody was dying, and just a dead person. So these were pretty traumatizing for somebody who's been sheltered their entire lives. And fortunately for us, he didn't cower per se. He was seriously trying to contemplate how to reconcile and deal with this suffering, because he realized it wasn't just something that other people go through, it's something that all people go through. And with that being the case, he went to go become an ascetic, because he's I did this hedonism thing, and that's not fulfilling for me, and also it's not going to really help anybody else from what I can tell. And so what he said, and so he went on to go join some ascetic people who basically went off into the woods to starve themselves and suffer to kind of get closer to divinity, or the answer in spiritual truth. And after almost dying, he was we're cool on that, this isn't going to work. So he went to go meditate under a tree, the Bodhi tree. Supposedly it still exists in India, according to the story, so it's a big deal. But basically, he meditated under a tree, and I'm going to leave out anything that seems especially supernatural, just because for pragmatic reasons. You guys, if you want to get into this metaphysical or cosmological stuff, that's cool. I like talking about it too. However, for pragmatic reasons, and because I try to ground things in secular shared reality that we all face, I will abstain from dragging the cosmology in for right now. For now, all that's important is that he lived a very pleasant initial life initially. Then he went and and willingly endure the opposite of that, and neither of those seemed to be working for him. So he sat under a tree, meditated, had some really otherworldly sorts of experiences psychologically that made him realize the importance of compassion as a driving force, and also that there's like what's known as now as the Four Noble Truths. Four Noble Truths I distill as: 1, suffering exists. 2, suffering is caused by pretty much almost absolutely by ignorance and attachment. Usually excessive attachment. I like put a little asterisk next to that. But yeah, just pretty much ignorance and attachment generate suffering, like if not immediately, over time. And then the third noble truth is that there's a way out of this, or a way to transcend this. And the fourth noble truth is that way is what I did, not what I did, but what Siddartha Gautama did, to become Buddha and become awake and aware, and like not have to be consciously like always like, personally you could look at him as like the first, or one of the earliest popular psychologists, we could say, or a phenomenologist for the people who are really fancy. Phenomenology is the study of the first person lived experience. So like psychology came out of that, and those are both part of like the greater branch of philosophy that studies metaphysics and ethics and theory of knowledge and all these things. But again, before we go into reciting the mantra to honor Gautama Buddha, I figured I should tell you that first the Four Noble Truths, so you know the Four Noble Truths now, and then the Eightfold Path. I will go into, that's like kind of a long thing to break down, and it has like subsections. But the three branches of the Eightfold Noble Path are perceptual training, mental training, and ethical training. They pretty much break down into these. It doesn't matter what, I personally feel like it doesn't matter, after things I've read and studied and experienced. I don't really think it really matters what variety of Buddhism you practice, as long as it works for you. As long as you're like, also, as long as they're somehow overlapping with the outline of the Eightfold Noble Path, which is perceptual training, meditation, or perceptual training, sort of like concentration and meditation. That's mental training. And then the third one is ethical training, being like not a terrible human being. So with that said, I'm going to recite the Tibetans' mantra. It's their book I got from a monk that I know. It's a really cool Chinese monk from the United States, or in the United States. And he's part of the Nyingma sect. Nyingma sect is one of the multiple branches. I'll give you an overview for just clarity. I'm going to end this really, really quick because it's already like gone. We're going to get to the mantra part. But the history and background is important. For Buddhism, after Buddha, there was like a unified school, more or less, of Buddhists. And these, as Buddhism traveled, these kind of diverged in their, at least perceptually you could say they diverged in attitudes and maybe philosophies regarding how to interact and experience Buddhism. Theravadan Buddhists were more sticking to, they're like fundamentalists in a way, but not in like usually the bad way. Usually like they're actually like not terrible. So but they're pretty much stick to the book. Like they have the Pali Canon, so they're like sort of like their Bible. It's like the codes of this is what happened with Buddha's life that we have. Like just, and they just trust that for the most part. They just stick to that. And Theravada is usually more of a personal like experience. It's more of a it's more about individual liberation from suffering, rather than emphasizing excessively the trying to lessen suffering of other individuals. You try and focus on eliminating suffering within the self. And if you're really hardcore about it, you can become a monk, and that's for any sect, I suppose. But usually, yeah, lay people, you just like listen to Buddhism and try and apply it to your daily life. So yeah, they're Theravadan. They follow the Pali Canon. That's like their list of rules, and the established, like, it's like if you want an Old Testament Buddhism, or people who are like need something to compare it a little bit with. And then there's Mahayana. Mahayana is what happened to Buddhism as it traveled. It kind of blended with cultures and philosophies as it went along, and to different throughout China, and then through China to like Southeast Asia and Japan and Korea and so forth. And it got really, really popular there, and was I mean, it's debatable whether you want to consider it refined, but I would say it opened up new avenues for the understanding and experience of Buddhism. And so within Mahayana Buddhism, which is like a whole bunch of other varieties, like subsets of that, from the seated meditation, Zen practitioner, it's kind of like a focus thing for each of the sects seems to have their preferred method of achieving the goal of enlightenment and Buddhahood, or like liberation. And that's for Chan practitioners, the emphasis is seated meditation. However, there's also mantras, and there's all like they all include a little bit of each other, but usually kind of a little bit more focused on one or another. So Zen practitioners usually seated meditation, and maybe koans, like thought, like anti-conceptual puzzles, sort of to try to break you in a good way. And then there's Pure Land. They kind of invoke the Buddha or one of the other Buddhas, because Mahayana recognizes multiple Buddhas in addition to Siddartha, and they kind of like invoke that Buddha. It usually involves more chanting or like a little bit more ritualistic. But as a subset of that, in between these points, you could say Vajrayana, which is one I'm kind of fond of. I started with that one kind of, and still feels pretty intimately connected to. But Vajrayana is kind of like the esoteric and like it's like a very, it's more ritualistic in nature, symbolic, and has like pretty philosophy and like, even though like this sounds like almost an insult within Buddhism to say it's conceptual laden, concept laden, but it's like some interesting different attitudes and experiences to go through, and to like it just tends to be more ritualistic, and mantras and all the other stuff are highlighted, but I would say mantras and ritualism is a little more common amongst Vajrayana, which is a subset of Mahayana. And then there's like other varieties, but I'm not going to go into all I don't even know all of them. There's just like so many. And of course there's subsets of the subsets. So like, just like there's Pure Land, there's like more than one pure version of Pure Land. And ultimately I'm worried sometimes these things they obscure the goal of Buddhism rather than help make it clearer. And it depends. I honestly think it's just a personal preference thing. Like, it's like deciding what kind of ice cream you like. Do you like chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream? It doesn't matter. So it's fucking whatever flavor enlightenment, as long as you get there, that's what matters. And that's what we're trying to like accomplish within Buddhism, is to achieve enlightenment, clear mental state, and to eliminate suffering, either of individual or individuals, network of individuals, and try and just like make the world a better place, which is, I dig that. It's more focused on this world and not merely the afterlife or previous lives per se. However, there's cosmology and stuff with that. So with that said, I'm going to now recite the one that they have in here for Shakyamuni Buddha, aka Siddartha Gautama, whose birthday it technically is. And also it's the full moon, and it's a king's tide. And I'm sure this was not an accident, of course, but still. He was technically a prince, so like I'm sure like once his dad passes away, he's sort of a king in a way as well. So let me get into Buddhism mode. Try not to take this stuff too seriously, because I think spiritual stuff tends to end up being like often treated too like dogmatically, and I'm a different type of person, I guess. I don't know, we'll see. So I have my Vajra here. Vajras are usually held when you're meditating in the right hand, with a mudra if you want. Mudras are hand signs and shit that's supposed to like essentially, they hold some kind of symbolism or a spiritual, like kind of like supposed to do something in some metaphysical way or psychological way. Whether you believe that or not doesn't really matter. I don't think, anyway. And then I have the bell. The bell and Vajra are supposed to go together. Supposed to symbolize masculine aspect. This one's supposed to symbolize the feminine aspect. I have to look into more research into why specifically maybe these symbols were specifically chosen. There's like always more. It's like a palace of things to examine within Buddhism that are like just full of rich interest. But for the most part, just this is what I feel like is immediately worth knowing. So you ring the bell. Clear the mind. It's also like, in a spiritual way, you want to kind of like show respect to the person or being or whatever the fuck you want to call it you're invoking or taking refuge in is what they call it. It's like sort of expressing confidence that this person has your back in some kind of metaphysical and psychological way, and that you sort of also have your back because you're doing the practice. So here we go. And I'm gonna read the instructions as well, just so it's like clear to you. Or actually, let me stop this video because it's at 15 minutes, and I'll start with the mantra, like explanation and everything as a whole. This was like a breakdown for everybody to understand what's going on and what I'm talking about. Hopefully, if there's questions, just ask me and I'll try and get back to it if I have time.